What is up, math superstars? I'm bringing to you objective 6.13 quadrilaterals. And so at the end of this lesson, you'll be able to describe and identify properties of quadrilaterals. First, we need to talk about what are quadrilaterals. All quadrilaterals have four sides. All quadrilaterals have four angles, and when you add them together, they equal 360 degrees. So now we're going to talk about how we can classify quadrilaterals. So the first classification we have here are parallelograms. Parallelograms, they have opposite sides that are congruent or the same. And so here we're going to mark this off here on a parallelogram using hatch marks. And so we can put one hatch mark on the left and the right side. So it says that these sides are congruent or the same. And then we can do the top and the bottom. We can say that the top and the bottom are the same. We also tell that the opposite sides are parallel or will never intersect. And so we know that the left and the right side, those are opposite sides. So these sides are parallel. So we're going to mark that off with arrows. So we'll put one and one on each for the left and the right. And then our top and the bottom are also parallel. So we're going to mark that off with two arrows. So saying that these two lines are parallel and will never intersect. And third, we have opposite angles that are congruent. And so we look here at the bottom left and the top right. These angles are congruent, so we're going to use one semicircle for these. And we know that our top right, or top left, sorry. So we're going to do two semicircles. And our bottom right, we know that these two angles are also congruent. So we have three different things that go with parallelograms. To recap, the opposite sides are congruent, the opposite sides are parallel, and the opposite angles are also congruent. Now we're going to talk about another classification, and they're called rectangles. So with rectangles, all the angles are right angles, and so they're all at 90 degrees. So we draw that here with our squares in each corner. And we know that a rectangle is also an example of a parallelogram because it has all of its qualities. And so if we recap the qualities of the parallelogram, the opposite sides are congruent. So we can see here we have that with a rectangle. So we're going to mark off our sides. One hatch mark for the left and the right, two for the top and the bottom. We also know that the opposite sides are parallel. So we're going to do that with our one arrow for the left and the right, and our two arrows for the top and the bottom. And we also know that in a parallelogram, the opposite angles are congruent. And so for here, we have our opposite angles are 90 degrees and 90 degrees. So that checks out. In the other two sides, the other two angles, that checks out. And so with that, a rectangle, we can say a rectangle is an example of a parallelogram. Another classification here is a rhombus. So here with the rhombus is an example of a parallelogram. So here, let's go through it. We have the left and the right side are congruent, but also the top and the bottom are also congruent. So the thing that makes a rhombus a little more specific here is that all of the sides here are congruent. So we're going to mark them all off with one hatch mark. We also know that the left and the right side are parallel, and the top and the bottom are parallel. And the thing that makes a rhombus an example of a parallelogram is also the angles. So we have the opposite angles are also congruent. So we mark that off with the one semicircle and the two semicircles. Now we're going to talk about squares. So a square is an example of a parallelogram, a rhombus, and a rectangle. So here's how this works. So in our square, the thing that makes this an example of a parallelogram is the opposite sides are parallel. But we also know about squares. A square is also a rhombus because all the sides are congruent. And what makes it also a rectangle is that the angles in our square are also 90 degrees. And so we also know that the opposite sides are parallel. So we're going to mark that off with our arrows here. And so we can say when we see squares, we can also call a square a parallelogram. We can also call a square a rhombus. We can also call a square a rectangle. But the more specific definition here is a square because it has all the sides are the same. It has 4 right angles and 2 pairs of parallel sides. So now we're going to talk about trapezoids. And so with trapezoid has only one set of parallel sides. And so with our trapezoid here, and so the only set is the top and the bottom are parallel. And then this trapezoid here is an example of a right trapezoid because it has one right angle. Another way we can classify quadrilaterals are isosceles trapezoids. And so an isosceles trapezoid has only one set of parallel sides, which is our top and our bottom. And also has one pair of opposite sides that are congruent. And so the opposite sides that are congruent are the left side and the right side here. Now we're going to talk about a classification called kites. So with this kite, a kite has 2 pairs of adjacent congruent sides. So what that means is the top sides are congruent, so they're going to get 1 hatch mark. And our bottom sides, they're going to get 2 hatch marks because they're also congruent. Adjacent, what the word adjacent means is that they are next to each other. And so that's why we have the top sides are congruent and the bottom sides are congruent. A kite also has 1 pair of opposite congruent angles. And so that 1 pair here, so we're going to mark it, our left and our right angles are congruent. And so this is how we're going to classify kites.